When we try to understand narcissism, it's easy to focus on the behavior, the manipulation, the need for admiration, the lack of empathy. But if we stop there, we miss the deeper truth. Narcissism is not primarily about ego or confidence, it is about control. And that control is not sought for pleasure or power alone, it is sought for survival. At its core, narcissism is a coping strategy developed in response to an inner world that feels unsafe, unstable, and deeply unregulated. A narcissist depends on external control because they lack internal regulation. Somewhere early in life, often in childhood, they learned that safety did not come from emotional attunement, consistency, or unconditional acceptance. Instead, they learned that control of attention, of perception, of other people's reactions was the closest substitute for security. This is why control is not optional for them. It is the mechanism they use to manage anxiety, shame, and a fragmented sense of self. This is an important shift in perspective. Narcissists do not seek control because they are strong. They seek it because they are internally unstable. Without dominance, validation, or emotional leverage over others, they are forced to face something they have spent a lifetime avoiding, their own vulnerability. And that vulnerability feels intolerable. So they control narratives, they control emotional climates, they control reactions. When they succeed, they feel momentarily whole. This is also why narcissists are so reactive to perceived loss of control. When someone refuses to comply emotionally, when they do not react with anger, fear, guilt, or admiration, it creates a rupture in the narcissist's psychological system. Calm, grounded presence is profoundly destabilizing to someone who depends on emotional turbulence to feel alive and powerful. Your peace is not neutral to them. It is threatening. Psychologically, this helps explain why narcissists escalate when they sense independence. The moment you stop reacting the way they expect, the moment you stop explaining yourself, defending yourself, or chasing their approval, they feel exposed. Control is their anesthesia. Without it, unresolved pain surfaces. So they push harder, provoke more aggressively, or attempt subtler forms of manipulation. What they are trying to restore is not dominance over you, but relief from their own internal chaos. Understanding this is not about excusing harm. It is about clarity. When you see that their need for control is driven by fear, you stop personalizing their behavior. Their criticism is no longer a reflection of your worth. Their anger is no longer evidence that you've done something wrong. It becomes what it always was, a strategy to regulate an inner world they do not know how to sit with. There is also a philosophical dimension here that matters deeply. Control is always outward-looking. Peace is inwardly rooted. When someone depends on control, they are, by definition, dependent on others. Their stability is borrowed. Your peace, however, is self-generated. It does not require permission. It does not depend on compliance. And this is why peace is the one thing narcissists cannot ultimately control. They can influence circumstances. They can distort narratives. They can provoke reactions. But they cannot inhabit your inner world unless you invite them in. This is where power quietly shifts. The moment you understand that their behavior is driven by internal scarcity rather than external authority, you stop engaging on their terms. You stop trying to win arguments that were never about truth. You stop defending boundaries that do not require justification. And most importantly, you stop mistaking their intensity for strength. Control looks powerful, but it is brittle. Peace looks quiet, but it is resilient. One collapses without compliance. The other endures regardless of resistance. So the question is no longer, how do I stop them from controlling me? The real question becomes, where am I still giving them access to my inner state? Because the moment you withdraw that access, not through anger, not through confrontation, but through clarity, you step outside their reach. And here is the truth to sit with. Narcissists crave control because without it, they must face themselves. Your peace denies them that escape. In choosing calm awareness over emotional compliance, you do not fight them. You outgrow them. Once we understand that narcissists rely on control to regulate their inner chaos, the next layer becomes clear. The primary tool they use to gain that control is emotional reactivity. They do not dominate through logic or truth. They dominate through emotional activation. Anger, guilt, fear, shame, confusion. These are not side effects of interacting with a narcissist, they are the intended outcomes. A narcissist studies emotional patterns intuitively. They learn what provokes, what wounds, what destabilizes. Over time, they develop a kind of emotional map of the people around them. When they press on certain points and receive a reaction, they gain leverage. The reaction itself becomes proof of influence. It tells them, I can still reach you, I can still move you. And in that moment, control is restored. This is why narcissistic interactions often feel so draining. You are not simply responding to a disagreement. You are being pulled into an emotional economy that was never designed for mutual understanding. The goal is not resolution. The goal is activation. Once activated, you are no longer fully present. Your nervous system is engaged in defense. Your clarity narrows. And in that narrowed state, manipulation becomes easier. From a psychological perspective, this operates at the level of the nervous system. When we are emotionally triggered, we move out of our reflective brain and into survival mode. We react rather than choose. Narcissists, often unconsciously, exploit this shift. They provoke urgency, outrage, or self-doubt because these states bypass discernment. When you are defending yourself, explaining yourself, or trying to correct a distortion, you are already playing on their field. This is also why arguments with narcissists feel circular and unresolved. Logic does not penetrate because logic was never the point. What matters is that you are emotionally engaged, that you are invested, that your inner state is now organized around their behavior. Once this happens, control is achieved, not because they are right, but because you are reactive. There is a deeper philosophical insight here. Reactivity always hands power outward. The moment your emotional state is determined by someone else's behavior, you have surrendered agency. This does not mean you should feel nothing. Emotions are natural responses to being threatened or dismissed. The issue is not feeling, it is identification. When emotion becomes the driver of action rather than an object of awareness, choice disappears. This is where peace begins to matter, not as an ideal, but as a skill. Peace is not the absence of feeling, it is the presence of awareness. It is the ability to notice activation without becoming it, to feel anger without letting anger decide, to feel hurt without letting hurt speak. This capacity is deeply threatening to a narcissist because it breaks the feedback loop they depend on. Without your reaction, their strategy collapses. When emotional reactivity no longer works, the narcissist is forced into a kind of exposure. Their attempts to provoke fall flat. Their intensity has no impact. And in that silence, they are left with themselves. This is often when they escalate or withdraw, not because you are wrong, but because you are no longer controllable. It is important to understand that refusing reactivity is not punishment. It is self-respect. It is the decision to stop organizing your nervous system around someone else's instability. You are not withdrawing to make a point. You are withdrawing to protect clarity. This shift changes everything. When you stop reacting, you start observing. When you observe, you regain perspective. When you have perspective, you regain choice. And when you regain choice, control quietly returns to where it always belonged, within you. So the invitation here is simple, but not easy. Notice where your reactions are being used against you. Notice where emotional urgency replaces discernment. And ask yourself, in those moments, not how do I respond, but what state am I choosing to live from? Because the moment you stop feeding reactivity, you don't just frustrate a narcissist, you liberate yourself. Once emotional reactivity no longer governs your responses, something subtle but powerful begins to happen. You discover that there is a place within you that remains untouched, regardless of how intense, manipulative, or chaotic another person becomes. This is the space of inner peace, not as an abstract ideal, but as a lived psychological reality. And this is precisely the space narcissists cannot control. Narcissists can influence behavior. They can distort conversations. They can manipulate social dynamic, CS, and provoke emotional storms. But they cannot directly access your inner awareness. They can only enter that space if you open the door through identification, when you believe their narrative, internalize their judgments, or allow your nervous system to be organized around their behavior. Peace, then, is not something they take from you. It is something you surrender, often without realizing it. Psychologically, peace is the capacity to remain anchored in self-awareness. It is the ability to observe thoughts, emotions, and external events without being consumed by them. When you inhabit this state, you are no longer fused with what is happening. You are present, but not entangled. This distinction is everything. Narcissistic control depends on fusion, on you feeling that what they say defines you, that what they feel is your responsibility, that what they provoke must be answered. Peace dissolves this illusion. From this grounded place, you begin to see how limited their reach actually is. Their words may still be sharp, but they no longer penetrate. Their attempts to provoke may still occur, but they no longer land. Not because you are numb or disengaged, but because you are centered. You are no longer living inside their emotional field. You are living inside your own. There is also a philosophical truth here that is deeply liberating. Anything that can be controlled from the outside was never truly yours to begin with. If your sense of self can be destabilized by another person's mood, approval, or disapproval, then it was built on external reference points. Peace marks a shift inward. It is the moment you stop asking, "How am I being perceived?" and start asking, "Am I aligned with myself?" That shift alone removes you from the narcissist's sphere of influence. This is why peace feels threatening to them. Not because it is aggressive, but because it is opaque. They cannot read it easily. They cannot manipulate it predictably. Calm awareness offers no emotional hooks, no leverage, no reaction to feed on. In the presence of peace, their usual strategies lose coherence. What once worked effortlessly now meets stillness, and stillness exposes the emptiness of control-based power. It's important to clarify that peace is not avoidance. It is not silence born of fear or compliance. It is an active internal stance. You are still aware. You still perceive reality clearly. You simply refuse to abandon yourself in order to manage someone else's emotions. This refusal is quiet, but it is absolute. From a nervous system perspective, peace represents regulation. It is a state in which your body no longer interprets another person's behavior as an existential threat. And once that threat response dissolves, you regain access to clarity, discernment, and choice. This is why peace restores power. Not because it dominates, but because it stabilizes. When you live from this place, you begin to notice a profound shift in your relationships. Interactions that once felt overwhelming now feel manageable. Provocations that once pulled you in now pass through without sticking. You are no longer trying to control the narcissist, and paradoxically, that is when their control ends. This is the turning point of the entire journey, when you realize that peace is not something you negotiate for, but something you inhabit. It does not depend on cooperatio. It does not require permission. It exists the moment you stop outsourcing your inner state. So let this be the reflection you carry forward. The narcissist can only control what you abandon. Your reactions, your self-doubt, your emotional availability to chaos. But the moment you root yourself in awareness, the moment you choose presence over provocation, you reclaim the one territory they can never occupy. Your peace is not fragile. It is not passive. It is sovereign. And once you realize that, control loses its grip because it no longer has anywhere to land. Once you understand that peace is an internal territory narcissists cannot enter, the next step becomes learning how to stay there. And this is where detachment enters, not as emotional coldness, not as indifference, but as psychological freedom. Detachment is often misunderstood. Many people hear the word and imagine withdrawal, silence, or a lack of care. In reality, healthy detachment is the opposite of disconnection. It is clarity without entanglement, presence without surrender. Narcissists rely on enmeshment. They blur emotional boundaries so thoroughly that you begin to feel responsible for their moods, their reactions, their dissatisfaction. Over time, you may find yourself constantly adjusting, choosing words carefully, managing their emotions, anticipating their responses. This is not connection, it is captivity. Detachment is the moment you recognize that their internal world is not yours to manage. Psychologically, detachment restores the boundary between self and other. It allows you to observe behavior without internalizing it. You can hear criticism without accepting it as truth. You can witness anger without assuming blame. This shift is subtle, but life-changing. The narcissist's power depends on your absorption, on your tendency to take in what they project. Detachment breaks that circuit. This does not mean you stop feeling. In fact, detachment often increases emotional honesty. You may feel sadness, disappointment, or even compassion, but those emotions no longer dictate your behavior. You are no longer driven by the urge to fix, explain, or prove yourself. You stop trying to correct distortions that were never created in good faith. You stop defending your reality to someone committed to misunderstanding it. From a philosophical standpoint, detachment reflects a mature relationship with reality. It acknowledges a difficult truth: some people cannot meet you in mutuality, not because you failed, but because they are psychologically unavailable. Accepting this is not pessimism, it is realism. And realism is deeply freeing. When you stop expecting empathy from someone incapable of offering it, you stop reopening the same wound. Detachment also protects your nervous system. When you are emotionally fused with a narcissist, your body remains in a state of vigilance. You are constantly scanning for threat, tone, mood shifts. Over time, this erodes peace. Detachment interrupts that cycle. It signals safety back to the body. It says, "I am not in danger simply because someone else is dysregulated." And in that message, regulation returns. What makes detachment so powerful is that it requires no confrontation. You do not need to announce it. You do not need to justify it. You simply stop participating in emotional chaos. You respond rather than react. You engage selectively rather than compulsively. And in doing so, you reclaim enormous amounts of energy that were previously drained by confusion and self-doubt. For a narcissist, this is deeply destabilizing. Their strategies depend on predictable engagement. When detachment appears, the familiar levers stop working. They may escalate, provoke, or attempt guilt. But without emotional access, these tactics lose effectiveness, not because you are fighting them, but because you are no longer available to be used. This is where many people struggle. Detachment can feel uncomfortable at first, especially if you were conditioned to equate love with self-abandonment. You may feel guilty for pulling back. You may worry that you are being unkind. But detachment is not cruelty. It is self-respect. It is the decision to stop bleeding for someone who refuses to heal. And here is the deeper truth. Detachment does not diminish your humanity. It preserves it. When you are no longer consumed by manipulation, you regain the capacity for authentic connection elsewhere. You become available for relationships grounded in mutual respect rather than control. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. So let this be the realization you carry forward. Detachment is not giving up on someone. It is giving yourself back to yourself. It is the quiet refusal to be emotionally hijacked. And in that refusal, something remarkable happens. The narcissist loses influence. And you regain freedom. Because the moment you stop absorbing what was never yours to carry, peace stops being fragile and becomes permanent. When narcissists lose control over your emotions, they often attempt something subtler but equally powerful. They try to define who you are. This is one of their most enduring strategies. Through criticism, gaslighting, comparison, or idealization, followed by devaluation, they construct a narrative about you and then pressure you to live inside it. Over time, this narrative can begin to feel more real than your own inner knowing. And when that happens, control is restored, not through reaction, but through identity. Reclaiming your identity is therefore not a cosmetic act. It is not about self-esteem slogans or surface confidence. It is a psychological homecoming. Narcissists depend on you doubting your own perceptions. They blur reality just enough that you begin to ask, am I too sensitive? Am I selfish? Am I the problem? These questions are not signs of insight. They are symptoms of prolonged exposure to distortion. Psychologically, identity erosion occurs when we outsource self-definition, when another person's approval, disapproval, or interpretation becomes the reference point for who we believe ourselves to be. We lose internal authority. Narcissists exploit this expertly. They present themselves as the arbiter of truth about your intentions, your character, even your memories. And unless this dynamic is interrupted, you begin to see yourself through their eyes. The turning point comes when you recognize that their version of you serves their needs, not your reality. Their narrative is designed to maintain control, not accuracy. Reclaiming identity begins with the refusal to accept definitions that shrink you. It means trusting your own experience again, your emotions, your perceptions, your values, not because they are flawless, but because they are yours. This is where psychological maturity emerges. You stop arguing with someone committed to misunderstanding you. You stop explaining yourself to someone invested in distortion. You stop trying to prove your goodness to someone who benefits from your self-doubt. Instead, you return to something quieter and far more stable, self-recognition. Philosophically, this is an act of existential courage. It is the decision to live from the inside out rather than the outside in. Many traditions speak to this. Authenticity, they suggest, is not something we acquire, it is something we recover. Narcissistic relationships pull us away from that center. Reclaiming identity is the process of returning. This return often feels unfamiliar at first. When you have lived under someone else's narrative for a long time, your own voice may feel faint. You may question yourself. You may feel guilt or fear when you assert your truth. This does not mean you are wrong. It means you are detoxing from external authority. As identity solidifies, something remarkable happens. Manipulation loses traction. Gaslighting stops working. You no longer need constant validation because you are no longer seeking permission to exist. Your boundaries become clearer, not because you are rigid, but because you know who you are and what aligns with you. And this is deeply unsettling for a narcissist. When you cannot be redefined, you cannot be controlled. When your sense of self no longer depends on their feedback, their leverage disappears. They may escalate, they may withdraw, but the power dynamic has already shifted. This is not about becoming confrontational, it is about becoming rooted. You don't need to announce your identity, you embody it, you act from it, you make decisions from it, and slowly, quietly, your life reorganizes around your truth instead of their distortions. So the reflection here is simple, but profound. Ask yourself where you have been living under someone else's definition of you, where you have been shrinking, explaining, or doubting your own experience to maintain peace that was never real. Because the moment you reclaim your identity, peace becomes more than an inner state. It becomes a way of living. And once you are anchored in who you are, no one else gets to decide who you should be. The final piece of this journey brings us to a simple but profound truth. Living from peace is an active practice. It is not something that happens automatically, nor is it the absence of challenge. Peace is not avoidance. It is not passivity. It is a conscious choice to maintain clarity, self-respect, and inner equilibrium in a world that often rewards reactivity and drama. And for a narcissist, this choice is the ultimate threat, because it denies them the one thing they rely on most: your energy, your attention, and your compliance. Living from peace requires consistent boundaries, both internal and external. Internally, it means observing your own thoughts and emotions without being swept away. It means noticing when irritation, guilt, or fear arises and asking, is this mine to carry? Externally, it means protecting your time, your space, and your autonomy. This does not require confrontation or aggression. It requires presence, awareness, and a refusal to participate in dynamics that compromise your clarity. Psychologically, practicing peace rewires your nervous system. When you are calm in the face of provocation, your body learns that external chaos does not equal internal threat. This is radical. Most of us have been conditioned to respond automatically to pressure, to react to intensity with intensity. Narcissists exploit that conditioning. They depend on your nervous system being hijacked. But when you practice living from peace, you reclaim control over your internal responses. Your energy is no longer available to feed their manipulation. Philosophically, peace is a statement about freedom. A narcissist's power depends on external leverage, on convincing you that you are somehow dependent on their approval, validation, or emotional state. When your equilibrium is self-generated, that leverage disappears. Peace is not passive resistance, it is sovereignty. It is saying without words, my inner life is mine. You cannot enter it without invitation. Your attempts to destabilize me will not succeed. And in this, there is a quiet but profound form of power. Practically, living from peace also transforms your relationships beyond the narcissist. When your baseline is calm and centered, you begin to interact with the world differently. You are no longer reactive, You no longer mirror the chaos that others attempt to project onto you. Your presence becomes stabilizing, not destabilizing. Others notice it, and it changes the dynamics of your interactions, creating space for authenticity, trust, and genuine connection. Peace is contagious, but it begins within. Importantly, practicing peace does not mean you tolerate abuse or neglect. It is not a call to remain in harmful situations or ignore boundary violations. Rather, it is the conscious refusal to let those situations define your internal state. It is the choice to act from awareness, not reactivity, whether that action is to disengage, to assert boundaries, or to walk away entirely. Peace is always active, not passive. It is a deliberate orientation toward your own inner authority. This practice also illuminates a profound paradox. The more you cultivate inner peace, the less external chaos matters. Narcissists may escalate, criticize, or attempt to provoke, but their behavior becomes background noise rather than defining reality. You exist in a different dimension, one that cannot be invaded by manipulation. This is the ultimate revenge. Not retaliation, not confrontation, but unshakable calm. It is a victory that is invisible to them but transformative for you. And here is the most powerful insight to carry forward. Peace is not fragile, and it is not conditional. It is self-generated. It is anchored in awareness, clarity, and the deliberate choice to inhabit your own inner life rather than someone else's agenda. Once you claim that, nothing outside your control can take it away. So, as you move through life, let this guide every encounter, every provocation, every challenge. Your peace is the one thing no narcissist can possess. It is your sanctuary, your power, and your freedom. Protect it, cultivate it, live from it. Because when your peace is intact, you are unassailable. And in that unassailability, you discover a profound, enduring freedom that no one can ever take from you.